All right, let's dive in. We're going to talk about just 45 words. But these aren't just any words. For over 200 years, they've been the source of some of our greatest freedoms and, yes, some of our fiercest debates. We're talking, of course, about the First Amendment. So this is it. These are the 45 words that make up the entire First Amendment. And what's just so incredible is that every single piece of this, freedom of speech, establishment of religion, the right to assemble, every one of them has been argued over and fought for and defined in courtrooms for literal centuries. Yep, just 45 words. It's kind of hard to believe, right? So what exactly are these 5 essential freedoms that are packed so tightly into this one single sentence? The ones that really form the bedrock of American democracy.
Okay, let's get into it. The 5 freedoms. Let's break down exactly what these powerful words are meant to protect.
You can almost think of these as a toolkit for being a citizen, right? First up, freedom of religion. That lets you believe whatever you want. Then you've got freedom of speech and the press. That's how you share your ideas and, importantly, critique people in power. The freedom of assembly, that lets you get together with people who think like you. And finally, the freedom of petition lets you take all those ideas as a group and go straight to the government. It's a really powerful system when you think about it. But what's so fascinating is, why these 5? Why were these the ones they chose? So, to really get the First Amendment, we got to rewind the clock. Let's take a look back. What was going on that made the founders say, okay, these rights have to be number 1? Okay, so here's a wild fact. The original Constitution, the one they drafted in 1787, it didn't have a Bill of Rights at all. And for a lot of people, that was a total deal breaker. They were worried they were just swapping out one powerful government for another. So the solution was a promise. We'll add a Bill of Rights. And they did. In 1791. Leading that whole charge was the First Amendment, which was basically designed to be a giant stop sign for government overreach. And look, this wasn't just some abstract philosophical idea for them. Not at all. They had really fresh, really vivid memories of what it was like to live under a government that censored the press, that had an official state church, and that threw people in jail for disagreeing. So the First Amendment was their direct, personal answer to all that. You've probably heard this phrase before from Thomas Jefferson, a wall of separation between church and state. It just perfectly captures what the religion part of the amendment is all about. This wall really does 2 things. On one side, you have the Establishment Clause, which means the government can't just create a national religion. And on the other, you have the Free Exercise Clause, which means the government can't mess with your personal beliefs. All right, now we're getting to one of the biggest, most common misconceptions about the First Amendment. Who is it actually protecting you from? The answer, well, it might not be what you think. So let's think about a real-world scenario. Let's say you post some controversial opinion online, and your boss at a private company sees it and fires you. Did they violate your First Amendment rights? And the answer, surprisingly to many, is no. This is maybe the most crucial thing to understand. The First Amendment is a check on the government, and the government only. So it applies to government actors, police, public school officials, lawmakers, you get the idea. It does not apply to private action. So private employers, social media companies, private universities, they get to make their own rules. Okay, so this leads us to another really big, critical point. These freedoms, they aren't absolute. Especially with speech, there have to be limits, right? The courts have spent centuries trying to figure out exactly where to draw that line. So, the big question is all speech protected? Does freedom of speech mean you can say literally anything you want, whenever you want, with 0 consequences? Well, the Supreme Court's answer has been a very clear and consistent no. Look, speech is heavily protected, maybe more than anywhere else in the world. But that protection isn't a blank check. The court has always had to do this balancing act between the right to free expression and, the need to prevent actual direct harm. So they've carved out some very specific, very narrow exceptions. So what are we talking about here? Things like incitement. That's not just saying you don't like something. It's actively trying to get people to commit violence, like right now. Then there's defamation. That's knowingly spreading lies about someone to ruin their reputation. And true threats, which are exactly what they sound like, saying you're going to hurt someone. You see the common thread, right? This isn't about protecting unpopular ideas. It's about speech that causes direct, tangible harm. And I have to say, the bar to prove any of these is incredibly high, but the limits are there. So what happens when you have this unstoppable force meeting an immovable object, like freedom of the press, versus the government saying, hey, this is a matter of national security? Well, that exact question was at the heart of one of the most famous and dramatic Supreme Court cases ever. At the center of this whole thing is a legal concept called prior restraint, and it's something the courts are extremely suspicious of. Basically, it's when the government steps in and acts like a censor, stopping a story before it can even be published. The Supreme Court sees this as one of the absolute biggest threats to a free press, and the bar for the government to justify it is, well, it's almost impossibly high. So picture this. It's 1971. The New York Times gets its hands on the Pentagon Papers. This was a top-secret study that showed in detail how the government had been misleading the public about the Vietnam War for years. They start publishing it, and, as you can imagine, the Nixon administration freaked out. They went straight to court to stop them, arguing that publishing this stuff would cause irreparable injury to national security. And in what was a truly landmark decision, the Supreme Court sided with the newspapers. Justice Hugo Black wrote this incredible line in his opinion that just sums it all up. The press was to serve the governed, not the governors. Basically, a free press is there to hold the government accountable to the people, not the other way around. What a powerful idea. But the First Amendment isn't just about big newspapers and huge court battles. It's about your right to dissent. It's for every single person who wants to make their voice heard, whether it's in a protest or even at the schoolhouse gate. Think about it this way. If freedom of speech is about having ideas, then the freedoms of assembly and petition are about putting those ideas into action. They're really the engine of social change. They protect your right to get together with other people and formally demand that your government actually listens. They are your tools for making change. And this right to dissent, it extends even further than a lot of people think, even into public schools. So back in 1969, in a case called Tinker v. Des Moines, a few students decided to wear black armbands to school to protest the Vietnam War. The schools suspended them, saying it would be a disruption. In this case, it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And what happened? The court sided with the students. Their reasoning was summed up in this one iconic line from the decision. They said that students do not shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gate. It was a huge statement, affirming that as long as you're not seriously disrupting school, you have rights too. So from the printing press all the way to today's digital world, these same 45 words have been the foundation for everything, for challenging power, for shaping debate, for driving real change. They're a shield to protect you from the government, sure, but they're also a tool for you, the citizen. So I guess the only question left is, in a world of endless debate and digital platforms, how are you going to use your 5 freedoms?